Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about how to schedule a meeting. So now that I've gone through and explained how wonderful this little widget, I guess, of the Zoom app is, I'm going to tell you that I actually prefer to schedule my meetings from their website directly. So do not click host a meeting because that will automatically kick on a meeting and it'll be awkward and it won't schedule a meeting. So instead go to my account. From my account, you'll want to go and click schedule a meeting. Okay, and so then from here you can title your meeting. So pad tutorial video. You can describe it, give people an idea of what's going on. For the scheduling, it'll automatically default to today's date followed by the next closest hour increment. So it's 10:32 now, so it rounds up to 11 a.m. Obviously, you can change that to whenever you need it. And then for duration, it's important to note that this isn't going to impact your ability to record past that duration point. It's just to give your participants an idea of how long it is. Now, I will say that if you're on a free account and you're hosting, I believe you're capped at 40 minutes, and then it will automatically close out. Now, that said, you can always renew a session and schedule another meeting immediately after it, and so it's not that big a deal. It's just kind of a mild interruption. But if your host has a paid account, they can schedule this for only 10 minutes, and it can go on for 10 hours, and you're not going to have any interruption in your meeting. There's no issue with that. Time zone for scheduling. This is really important, obviously, for our fraternity because we're all over the world. So it's helpful to have that selected right. Now, if you know that you're going to have recurring meetings, it's a good idea to look into this by enabling that by clicking on it. You can set it up for however you need it to recur, and then you can actually pick an end date as well. That way you can schedule out your meetings for the next 6 months if you wanted to. Registration. This is a nice idea if you want to give your host kind of an RSVP number. I think it's kind of a hassle and another step for people to go through, but I can definitely see the benefits of it as well. Your meeting ID. So Zoom can do one of two things. They can randomly generate numbers, a code that looks something like this, and that's going to be the invitation code that your participants are going to plug in when they want to join a meeting. What I think is helpful is if you know that you're going to be meeting with the same people on kind of the same subjects indefinitely, you can set up a personal meeting ID, and it's going to be that same code every time that they want to do a meeting. Now, obviously, there's some security issues with this because if someone gets this code number and they want to, be obnoxious and join in a meeting they're not invited to, they will have the number to get into any meeting that you're hosting. So obviously use your discretion with that. There are ways to prevent this, and we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the waiting room function. But for now, just be aware that you can either have a number that changes every time or you can have a consistent number. Meeting password. This is a handy feature if you are wanting to use the recurring number. You can just change this password for the next meeting because you get to these settings every time you're scheduling a new meeting. Just change the password every time if you want. I personally don't like passwords. That's just one more thing for your participants to try to remember and manage. It'll be in their invitation that you send them, but it's just one more thing for them to shift between screens and type out and try to remember. So it can kind of be a pain. So I don't like to use them typically. As far as these are your settings for video when you are in the Zoom call. So this is going to automatically have the host video on. This is automatically not going to require the participants to have their video on. It's going to give them the option. If you click video on for participants, it can't force them to turn on their webcams. All it does is it prompts them and says, hey, your host wants you to turn on your webcam, and then it'll give them the option to turn it on or off. But those are some handy functions, things to be aware of. With audio, a lot of Zoom calls people will physically call into. They'll get a different number to dial in their cell phone into it if they're driving down the road and they can't do a video call right there. So that's one way they can do that. They can also obviously use their device audio, whether it's a computer, iPad, cell phone, using the Zoom app. So most meetings, you're just gonna want to pick both. It's easier that way. Meeting options, we're going to talk about each of these in depth a little bit here. So enable before host, join before host. What this does is if you're running late to hosting your meeting and your participants are already signing on, they can kind of sit there and wait for you to show up and talk to each other if you have the join before host box checked. Now, if you don't have this checked, what's going to happen if your participant tries to log on before you do, it's going to put them in this waiting room that says, hey, your host isn't here yet, and the host will admit you into the video as soon as they join. And so they're kind of in this weird like waiting room, purgatory, limbo place where they can't talk to anybody or see any of the other participants. Sometimes there are benefits to that, but sometimes it's just kind of awkward for your participants. The mute participants upon entry feature is really handy. So Zoom can have hundreds of people on a call at a time, and we all have little background noises that we make when we're shuffling papers or moving stuff around or typing on our keyboard. And when you multiply that by 100 or hundreds, it gets pretty unwieldy pretty fast. So it's a good idea if you're hosting really big meetings to automatically mute everybody as soon as they join the call. They can potentially unmute themselves, or you can always manually unmute them as well. That is a handy feature. Enable waiting rooms. I love the waiting room function. So this is basically where your guests can wait when they try to log into your Zoom video. It'll notify you as the host that they're trying to join your meeting. You can look at their username and figure out who they are, and then you can decide to either admit them or reject them. So this helps with some of the security functions. Also, if you're using this for court proceedings like our district is, you can potentially use it as a sequestration tool. So you can either not let them in if you know that they're going to be the second witness, or you can have them in, and then you can always, as the host, send someone to a waiting room while you're on the Zoom call. So you can effectively sequester people, and they just go to a blank screen that says you're in the waiting room, and the host will either let you back in or something like that. So that's a cool function. I really enjoyed the waiting rooms. The only authenticated users can join function, I'm not a fan of. It requires everybody to have a Zoom account set up. I think that's just one more kind of step for people to trip over. I could see some benefit to it for security purposes potentially, but I think more than likely it's just going to be a pain. Breakout rooms pre-assigned, so this gives you the option if you know who's going to be all your participants and you know you want to use a breakout room, which we'll talk about in another video. You can actually set up these rooms and plug in using email address all the participants that you want in a room, and then you can always change those rooms or reassign them once you're in the meeting as well. But we're not going to do breakout rooms in this video. That's way too much to cover in one video. Recording the meeting, I did this with my district justice conference, and so this is a great tool if you want a video record of what happened. Our courts are recording all of our hearings so that we have a record on appeal. You can either save the video locally to your computer or into the cloud if you have a paid account. One thing I'll say is I prefer the local computer. The only thing is you need to make sure that you have enough free space on your hard drive to save a video that's going to be several gigabytes in length. Zoom meetings can go on a long time, and it is video, and so the gigabyte count adds up pretty quick. I don't like the cloud option as much for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's got some security issues if it's up in the cloud for everyone to see, but also I mean, anyone could hack it or take it. Obviously, it's not put on display for anyone to see, but there's obviously always going to be more security issues when things are stored in the cloud. The other thing is, it takes a long time to download large video files, and so it's kind of a pain to sit around and wait for your video to download from the cloud if you need it on a local device. You can also set up alternative hosts. So if you want a co-host and you know that right out of the gate, you can set that up here as well. Once you save your preferred meeting settings, it's going to redirect you to kind of a recap page here. So I'll just wait for my internet to come out of 1999 and hurry up and do that. Maybe, eventually, one day. Great. And so it's going to give you some scheduling options. So you can add this to your calendar, which is a really handy tool if you've downloaded the extensions, which is not that complicated. I'll try to cover that in a later video. I don't know if I'll have time. Then it's going to just kind of tell you what you've set up. So this is your meeting ID. You are requiring a password. Here's the invitation link. If you click copy invitation, it's going to open up a dialog box, and you can click copy meeting invitation. It automatically will highlight everything for you here, and then it's going to tell you that it's copied it to your clipboard. So all you would have to do is go into email or Facebook Messenger or whatever you're communicating with, and then right click and hit paste, and it will paste this entire invitation. You see in the invitation, it tells you, you know, what the meeting is, what time it's scheduled for. Here's a link that they can click directly to take them to join the meeting. Here's the ID number if they want to go to zoom.us, click join a meeting and type that in. And then the numbers to call in if you are not joining via device. So that's the invitation function. And then more of a recap of everything that you've set up for this meeting. And that is, very simply, how you schedule a meeting in Zoom.